All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to kind of jump back in time to the late 1800s. Check out this true crime case. I think it really gripped the nation at the time. The story of Antonio Nardello.
Mm,
We've got some excerpts here from a Wikipedia article all about him, and we're going to, unpack his life, his crimes,
yeah,
really try to get inside his head and understand what made him tick.
yeah,
You ready?
absolutely. Let's dive in. I think it's a really fascinating case, especially when you consider the historical context. We're talking about late 19th century America. I mean, it was a time of huge social change, right?
Yeah.
You've got these massive waves of immigrants, a lot of Italians in particular, seeking new lives in America.
Right.
And I think Nardello's story kind of gives us this glimpse into that world, and some of the often really harsh realities they faced.
Yeah, the article says he was born in Naples, Italy, back in 1864.
Okay.
And here's a detail that really jumped out at me.
Hmm.
His father was actually imprisoned for 20 years for something called brigandage.
Brigandage.
Did you have to look that one up?
Oh, yeah, I did. It just sounds like so dramatic, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, it just means banditry, often like armed robbery, violence, that kind of thing.
Like a bandit? Yeah.
Yeah, so Nardello grows up without a father, in a society where crime and punishment are, very much intertwined.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, what impact did that have on him,
Right.
growing up with that kind of stigma, Knowing your father was a convicted criminal.
I mean, it's definitely a question worth considering, right? Did it shape his views
Yeah.
on morality, right and wrong? Did it, somehow pave the way for his own, descent into crime?
So he comes to the U.S. in 1883. Young man, looking for a fresh start. So many immigrants at the time.
Right.
But the article says he moved around a lot, working as a laborer in New York, Chicago,
Huh.
then finally settling in Cecil County, Maryland.
Okay.
It almost feels like he was running from something,
Yeah.
never quite finding his place.
That constant movement. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Was it driven by a need to escape his past, or was it just, a struggle to make ends meet in this new and unfamiliar land?
Yeah, I mean, and then in 1884, things take a very dark turn.
Mm-hmm.
He commits his first murder.
Wow.
The victim was a man named Brosnan, nicknamed the Blacksmith.
Okay.
He's killed along the Philadelphia Road in Gunpowder, Maryland.
That location, it kind of stands out to me like a rural road, It kind of suggests a crime of opportunity, maybe.
Yeah,
The article does mention robbery was the motive.
right.
But was it planned, or did something happen in the moment
Yeah.
that triggered the violence?
And here's the thing that really blows my mind about this. Another man, Suliano, was actually convicted of Brosnan's murder.
Whoa.
He spent 2 years in prison before Nardello confessed and cleared his name.
Wow, can you imagine that injustice?
No.
I mean, it's a chilling reminder that even back then, right,
Yeah,
with limited forensic technology,
right.
mistakes could happen.
And he did.
Makes you wonder how many other wrongful convictions might have occurred.
Yeah,
Cases where the real perpetrator just got away.
it's a sobering thought. But tragically, this was just the beginning of Nardello's murderous spree. Just a few months later, he kills again.
Oh, no.
This time, the victim is Antonio de Balbo, a
Okay.
man Nardello was actually living with.
So this murder feels very different from the first one.
Yeah.
The article says Nardello knew that De Balbo had cash,
Uh-huh.
and he lured him out on a walk, shot him, and then stole his watch and money.
Wow.
That suggests premeditation.
Yeah.
It was a cold-blooded act.
Yeah, and there's this strange detail, too.
Yeah.
A letter in Italian was found near the body,
Okay.
addressed to someone named Antonio Sabini.
Antonio Sabini.
Was that a clue? Was it a distraction? Did they ever figure out who Sabini was?
It's like a breadcrumb trail leading to the unknown.
Right.
Was Nardello trying to implicate someone else, or was it a red herring?
Yeah.
To throw off the investigation.
Right.
But it's definitely a piece of the puzzle that makes you want to keep digging.
Yeah. And dig we shall.
Right.
Because Nardello's story doesn't end there. He leaves Maryland, heads to Washington, D.C.,
Oh.
where he strikes again in 1885.
Jeez.
This time, the victim is Carmine Rotuno, an Italian immigrant working as a laborer and shoemaker.
So this is where we start to see a pattern emerging, right? A
Yeah,
possible motive beyond just simple robbery.
right.
The article says that Nardello lured Rotuno with the promise of work,
Hmm.
essentially preying on his, like, vulnerability, his need to earn a living,
Yeah.
you know?
It's really tragic. I mean, Rotuno was just trying to make his way in a new country.
Right.
And he crossed paths with this predator. His body was found in an abandoned shack.
Uh,
And this time, the murder was even more brutal.
the article describes it as uh, a pretty gruesome scene.
Yeah.
Rotuno's throat had been cut.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this level of violence is disturbing,
Yeah.
and it might indicate like a deeper rage or a need to exert power that goes beyond just taking valuables.
It certainly paints a darker picture
Yeah.
of Nardello's character. But this time, his luck runs out. He's arrested the same day
Oh.
that Rotuno's body is found. He was caught at the Baltimore and Potomac Depot, about to skip town with a woman named Willa Morrow.
Okay.
Get this. She was using the alias Frank Rosso.
Frank Rosso.
Yeah.
Now, using an alias back then wasn't uncommon, especially for someone, trying to avoid detection
Right.
or maybe like reinvent themselves.
Right, right.
But it raises questions about Morrow's role in all of this.
Yeah.
Right? Was she an accomplice? A lover on the run? What's her story?
Right.
Hmm.
The plot thickens even further when the police search Morrow's room and find bloody clothing, linking Nardello directly to Rotuno's murder. But here's where it gets really interesting. Under questioning, Nardello claims there were two other accomplices,
What?
Pasquale Gessimonte and Pasquale Abundante.
So now he's trying to shift the blame.
Yeah,
But were these alleged accomplices even real, or were they like figments of his imagination,
Yeah.
created to, muddy the waters and cast doubt on his guilt?
right.
The article says no evidence ever connected them to the crimes.
Yeah, it sounds like Nardello was trying to, play the system,
Right.
even as the evidence against him mounted. And get this, his trial became a huge sensation,
Oh, wow.
making it almost impossible to find unbiased jurors.
Wow.
News traveled fast even back then.
Absolutely. And the article mentions this, even the Italian minister got involved, Baron Saverio Fava.
Oh, wow.
He sent a thank you letter to Nardello's lawyer.
Really?
This case wasn't just a local crime story, it was drawing like international attention.
Yeah.
Perhaps reflecting, some of the anxieties and prejudices surrounding Italian immigrants at the time.
It's incredible how this one case just, tapped into so many, social and political currents
Right.
of the era. It's like we're peeling back layers of history,
Yeah.
revealing all these, complexities beneath the surface.
Exactly. And I think we've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
There's so much more to unpack in Nardello's story.
Yeah.
His trial, his eventual confession.
Yeah.
And those lingering mysteries, right,
Right.
surrounding his motives, and those alleged accomplices.
Stay tuned, because we're about to dive even deeper in part 2 of our exploration of Antonio Nardello. All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into the life and crimes of Antonio Nardello. Last time we left off with him facing trial for the murder of Carmine Rotuno, right?
Yeah, the evidence was really piling up against him. Public interest was, through the roof at this point.
Yeah,
And he's telling this story about, two accomplices that nobody can find.
right.
It was quite a scene, I bet. I imagine the courtroom was just buzzing with anticipation.
Yeah.
And remember, Nardello couldn't speak or understand English.
Right.
So they had to bring in this interpreter, Mancasus, to make sure everything was translated accurately.
Yeah, can you imagine trying to, navigate a complex legal process in a language you don't understand?
Oh, man.
Just adds another layer of pressure to this already, high-stakes situation.
Absolutely. And the trial itself was no walk in the park. Over 200 witnesses were called to testify.
Wow.
Each one, offering a piece of the puzzle, trying to paint this clear picture of what happened leading up to Rotuno's death.
One of those witnesses was Carmine Gaudio, who ran the boarding house where Rotuno lived.
Okay.
And he testified that Rotuno had visited him, several times on the day he disappeared.
Okay.
While he didn't actually see Nardello that day, he did recognize those blood-stained pants, the ones they found in Willamaro's room.
Oh, right.
That's belonging to Nardello.
Okay, so that must have been a key piece of evidence for the prosecution, right?
Yeah.
Connecting him directly to the crime scene. And yet, even with all this evidence piling up against him,
Yeah.
he stuck to his story,
Right.
demanding that his so-called accomplices, Gessimonte and Abundante, be brought to justice.
It's almost like he was trying to create this, alternative narrative, deflecting attention from his own guilt.
It's definitely a curious strategy. Was he genuinely convinced that others were equally responsible?
Yeah.
Or was it just a desperate attempt to, minimize his own role, to make himself seem less culpable?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, What was going on in his mind at that point? Was he
Mhm.
delusional, manipulative,
Yeah, yeah,
or like maybe a combination of both?
it's possible.
Yeah,
Well, regardless, the jury didn't buy it.
right.
On December 12th, 1885, Nardello was found guilty of Martino's murder and sentenced to death.
Wow.
The article describes him as appearing stoic at first, but then just breaking down in tears on his way back to jail.
Like the reality of the situation finally hit him.
Yeah, absolutely. The weight of that sentence,
Yeah.
the finality of it all must have been overwhelming.
Yeah, and from this point on, we see a shift in Nardello's behavior, right?
Okay.
While he's on death row, he turns to religion. He starts writing letters to newspapers back in Italy, even sending photos back to his family.
It seems like he was seeking solace, trying to, like, make amends or something. Maybe even hoping for a miracle.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast to the, like, cold-blooded killer we've been learning about.
Right.
It makes you wonder if there was a genuine sense of remorse there, or a desire to connect with his roots, or simply a fear of, what awaited him.
And get this, he was actually granted a 3-week reprieve
Really?
by President Grover Cleveland, no less.
A reprieve? That's a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, yeah.
It shows that even in those days, there was, like, room for mercy, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story than meets the eye.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the case, but sadly, the reprieve was short-lived.
Right.
And here's where things take another kind of unexpected turn.
Okay.
Just one day before his scheduled execution, Nardello confesses
To all three murders.
to all 3 murders: Brosnan, DeBelbo, and Rotuno.
Wait, so after all this time, maintaining his innocence, spinning this elaborate tale about accomplices, he finally comes clean. Why? What could have possibly motivated him to confess at, like, the very last minute?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question.
Yeah.
Was it a genuine act of remorse, like a desire to, unburden his soul before facing his maker?
Right.
Or was there something else at play, maybe like a last-ditch effort to delay his execution, hoping that a confession might lead to further investigation?
Yeah, it's almost impossible to know for sure
Right.
what was going on in his mind. Even as he's walking to the gallows, he's still proclaiming his innocence, muttering prayers in Italian.
It's like it's a caught between seeking redemption and clinging to denial.
Yeah, a really complex and, like, contradictory picture.
Absolutely.
Raises even more questions about, like, the nature of his guilt,
Mm.
his motivations, and, the truth behind his story.
Uh-huh.
So on May 28th, 1886, Antonio Nardello is hanged at the D.C. jail.
Wow.
And, the article goes into some pretty graphic detail about the execution. It describes the trapdoor, the 8 minutes it took for him to die, even mentions this, like, faint pulse that lingered,
Jeez.
even after his body was lowered. It's just a stark reminder of, like, the brutality of capital punishment in that era.
It's a chilling end to a really disturbing story.
Yeah.
But even in death, Nardello leaves us with more questions than answers.
Yeah, like, what really drove him to commit these heinous acts? Who was Willa Morrow?
Right.
What was her role in all this?
Right. And what about those alleged accomplices?
Yeah, and there's one more detail that just doesn't sit right with me.
What's that?
So, in his confession, Nardello said he shot Antonio de Balbo,
Right.
but the evidence actually pointed to, like, blunt force trauma, remember?
Oh, yeah.
Could he have been lying?
I mean, that is a discrepancy. It suggests there might be more to the story
Yeah.
than we know. Did Nardello have, like, some inside knowledge
Yeah.
of DeBelbo's murder?
Yeah.
Or was he just, trying to inflate his crimes, make himself seem even more notorious?
Yeah, it's unsettling to think that even in his confession, he might have still been manipulating the truth. But that's the thing about Nardello's story. It's just full of these twists and turns,
Right.
layers of deception, and unanswered questions.
Exactly. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive,
Yeah.
we're going to explore those lingering mysteries, examine the discrepancies in Nardello's confession,
Right.
the whole enigma of those alleged accomplices,
Yeah.
and what this case can really tell us about the complexities of crime and punishment in, this bygone era.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive on Antonio Nardello, and I gotta say, even after all this time, all these twists and turns, this case still has me kind of baffled.
It really is a head-scratcher, isn't it? I mean, we've got that late confession, those mysterious accomplices, and then there's even, like, whispers of more victims. It's like we're piecing together this puzzle, and some of the pieces are missing.
Yeah, exactly. Like we were just saying how Nardello confessed to shooting Antonio de Balbo, but, like, the evidence pointed to something totally different.
Yeah, right. The official reports, if you remember, suggested blunt force trauma. Not a gunshot. And, if you think back, some of DeBalbo's fellow workers, they were already kind of suspicious of Nardello even before the body was even discovered.
Oh, right, right.
It makes you wonder if, maybe Nardello was just trying to, insert himself into a crime he didn't even commit.
Wow, so maybe he heard rumors or something, saw an opportunity to take credit for a crime that was already, unsolved. That's crazy. A killer not only wants to escape justice, but, wants to control the whole narrative of his crimes.
And then you've got those alleged accomplices, right? Jessamante and Abundante.
Right.
Nardello insisted they were involved, but no evidence ever linked them to any of the murders. I mean, were they just figments of his imagination?
Yeah, were they just made up to throw off the investigators?
Right. Or could they have been real people who somehow managed to stay completely off the radar?
Yeah, maybe they were even smarter than Nardello, better at hiding.
I mean, it's possible, right? Makes you wonder if there might be other crimes out there, other victims, connected to this whole thing.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, right. It adds this whole other layer to the case. Even though we have the confession, it's like the confession actually just opened up more questions.
More questions than answers, yeah. It's like this unsettled feeling. Like we have the facts, but we may never truly understand what Nardello did or why.
And I think it's really important to remember the historical context, too. We're talking about a time of massive immigration, right?
Right.
Especially from Italy. And there were all these social and economic anxieties, prejudice directed at these new immigrants.
So Nardello's crimes weren't just happening in a vacuum. It was all this social change, all this tension happening at the same time. Makes you wonder if, maybe that contributed to what he did.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely something to think about. And I think it leads us to a much bigger question, really. What drives a person to commit such violence?
Right.
I mean, was Nardello simply a product of his circumstances, the son of a criminal, just trying to make it in a new country? Or was there something more?
Right. Was he just born bad?
Right. Something much darker, a true disregard for human life.
That's always the question, isn't it? Was it nature or nurture? Or some crazy mix of both? I mean, how much did all that social stuff in the time period really play a role?
It's a tough question, right? No easy answers. But I think, really grappling with these ideas, the things that lead to violence, that's important.
Yeah, I agree. We might never know all the answers about Nardello, but I think his story reminds us that, the past is never really past.
It's true.
It affects us today, makes us think about uncomfortable things, about ourselves and the world.
Yeah, well said. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and crimes of Antonio Nardello, I hope it's been more than just interesting. I hope it makes you want to keep learning, keep asking those tough questions.
Right.
Think about the impact Nardello's crimes had on the Italian community and the justice system back then, which had its own set of problems, right?
I mean, even today.
Right, exactly. And, maybe Nardello's story helps us understand violence a little better and hopefully even prevent it.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.